we'll try all the harder to be interesting, given that you've just had lunch. Our panel is called In Principle, Philosophy and the Law. And my name is Dan Philpott. I'm here at Notre Dame as the director for the Center of Civil and Human Rights. And very pleased to introduce our two speakers, Christopher Tollefsen and Gerard Bradley. Now, this morning we heard very up-close reports from the ground about the kind of consequences, effects, and dynamics of pornography. Our speakers on this panel will focus on pornography from a philosophical perspective, and will consider the proper relationship between pornography and the law. We would like to give special recognition to the Witherspoon Institute for its support of this panel. So, Christopher Tollefsen is, to my right, is professor of philosophy at the University of South Carolina. He graduated from St. Anselm College with a BA in philosophy and received his PhD in philosophy from Emory University. Chris is a senior fellow at the Witherspoon Institute and sits on the editorial board of Public Discourse. He is the co-author of Embryo, A Defense of Human Life with Robert George. And his latest book, Lying in Christian Ethics, was published by Cambridge University in 2014. His current research interests include natural law ethics and the ethics of false assertion. Then to my left is Gerard Bradley, who's professor of law here at Notre Dame, where he teaches legal ethics and constitutional law. Gerry received his BA and JD degrees from Cornell University, graduating summa cum laude from the law school in 1980. After serving in the trial division of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, he joined the law faculty at the University of Illinois. He moved to Notre Dame in 1992. Here he directs with John Finnis the Natural Law Institute and co-edits the American Journal of Jurisprudence, an international forum for legal philosophy. Bradley has been a visiting fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University and a senior fellow of the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, New Jersey. He served for many years as president of the Fellowship of Catholic Scholars. So Chris will be speaking first. I think you said you wanted to use the podium. Yeah. So we'll give you 25 or 30 minutes, and then we'll hear from Gerry.
Thanks very much. It's very exciting to be here. I really appreciate the invitation. I am going to take a little bit of a step back from the more concrete direction that we were taking earlier in the day. And really, I'm just going to try and articulate 10 thoughts. This is really what philosophers do. All right. So, what are 10 thoughts that I could give you? So I have 10 thoughts. They hardly rise to the level of being a paper, but they are connected in various ways. And I'll just tell you as I get to each number. The first one is this, that pornography, the nature of pornography is a function of intention, both in its production and its distribution and also in its reception. Well, what intention? I think it's something like this: to create or use material things so as to arouse or satisfy illicit sexual desires, such as desires related to persons who are not one's spouse, or desires to perform non-marital but sexual acts, or both. So then why is pornography pervasive, as we have in our title? One reason is obvious. Those who produce and distribute material stuff with this as their primary intention have more resources, such as the internet, at their disposal, and a more welcoming and compliant society and marketplace than has ever been known before. So pornography is big business, as we've seen. But the definition suggests some further considerations. In addition to material which is produced and consumed with this as its sole intention, there's a lot of what we could call dual-use pornography. Items produced for some other purpose, but also for the sake of arousing sexual desire. And some items that are produced only for some other purpose are also consumed for the sake of arousing sexual desire. So a huge amount of advertising, movies, TV show, and other media are pornographic in intention insofar as one purpose that they're made, for which they're made, is to arouse illicit sexual desire. And these social realities combined with some ubiquitous human urges and emotions, also incline people to use not essentially pornographic items, that is, things that weren't intended to be pornographic in their creation, but it inclines people to use such items pornographically more than they otherwise might. Trained to accept pornography and to seek it out, we find it even where it doesn't exist, such as even in pictures of women in underclothes, for instance, as was mentioned earlier. 2, the wrongness of pornography can't be fully understood apart from an adequate understanding of the good of marriage. Now, by marriage here, I mean a permanent, exclusive, and self-giving union of a man and woman, realized, expressed, and experienced by bodily, sexual union open to new life, and thus itself oriented to the procreation and rearing of children. And by good of marriage, I mean that this form of life gives us a basic reason for action. It's desirable for its own sake, and must be respected and promoted and protected in all our acts, even when we're not acting directly for its sake by, for example, getting married or contributing to the good of our already existing marriage. Now, to be a person capable of realizing or respecting this good, that is, capable of being married or of being unmarried without failing in respect for and protection of this good, that clearly requires, among other things, cultivation of certain virtues and dispositions. And among these dispositions is this, I think, an absolute unwillingness to deliberately arouse or satisfy sexual desire with somebody who's not your spouse. That's a disposition that's essential to, although it's not the whole of, the virtue of chastity. The argument for this claim, in its absolutely most condensed and cursory form, is something like this. Commitment to enter into an exclusive, permanent, and self-giving relationship is vitiated by one's willingness to share the one feature of that relationship by which that particular commitment can be physically realized, namely sexual intercourse, the one feature by which the unity of spouses is made more than spiritual or metaphorical, willingness to share that with another. And so one can't make that commitment without the absolute unwillingness I just described. Absolute unwillingness to deliberately arouse or satisfy sexual desire with someone other than your spouse. Now, the aim of the producers of pornography is obviously to eliminate exactly that unwillingness. Chaste persons are of no use to producers of pornography. So those who use pornography as intended erode in themselves a disposition that's essential for married life. This is a form, I think, of self-mutilation, obviously bad for the married and the to-be married, but also bad even for those who intend never to marry. Self-mutilation in this respect is radically contrary to the good of marriage and is incompatible with an appropriate openness to all goods and all persons. Now, this, I think, is the core of the moral case against pornography, and there's lots more that could be said about that, but I'm going to say more about some other bad things that we can say about pornography. There's no shortage, unfortunately. So, point 3, pornography makes public what should be private. Perhaps it can be helpful to think a bit about why privacy is important to marriage and sexuality. It's not because there's something gross about public nudity or sex, or because people find them offensive. Rather, the offense is related to features of publicizing sexual acts and our body's sexual dimensions that stand in tension with the image of marital sexuality that I've just presented. Consider the scope of marital commitment. Pope St. John Paul II often characterized that commitment as one of complete self-giving, of total self-donation. I think that language is defensible and correct. But if so, then it calls for a dimension of privacy to the acts that most fully realize and express that commitment, namely sexual marital acts. Sharing those acts with others vitiates the completeness and exclusivity of the commitment that those acts realize, as I just argued. But making those acts public is a kind of sharing. Sex tapes made by happily married people for distribution to their friends would be wrong, if for no other reason than for this, that they shared publicly what should belong only to the mutuality of the couple's life together. To some extent, these considerations must also be true of the sharing of the sexual dimensions of our body. It can be appropriate to share them, as when we disrobe for our doctor. It can be appropriate for genuinely aesthetic purposes, as when a model disrobes for a painter. But a sharing of one's body as sexual by means of images of that body or its display on stage is giving to another what should be shared only with a spouse. Point 4. Pornography use has both an active and a passive dimension that each mirror something of marital sexuality, but in a distorted way. Genuine freedom, as John Paul made great efforts to explain, exists only in an agent's relationship to truth and to an orientation towards self-giving. John Paul was fond of quoting from Gaudium et Spes 24, quote, "Man is the only creature on earth which God willed for itself, and he cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself," end quote. The Pope was especially insistent on this point in discussing marriage and marital sexuality. This great truth about freedom is distorted in contemporary liberal, materialistic consumer societies, as both relationship to truth and orientation to self-gift are eliminated from our conception of freedom. Absent these, freedom's expression is reduced to the desire for control and for obtaining satisfaction at will, and freedom's realization is reduced to mastery over material resources so as to satisfy our desires. Pornography affects this very reduction. Its consumers are offered an entire world, literally beyond their wildest dreams, of sex, which they can take and make their own at will, with no more than the touch of a computer key. There can be no rejection, no vulnerability, and no failure to get what they want. But the consuming of pornography involves no self-donation at all. There's nothing of oneself that one is sharing with another. Even fornicators hold on to the hope and desire of engaging in sharing, of mutuality. But consumers of pornography have given up on this. They merely take, and consume is obviously, I think, the best description of what they're doing. When we refer to them as consumers of pornography, I think that's an instance of language mattering. Whether it's more gravely sinful than fornication or less, pornography use is, I think, further away from marital sexuality than acts engaged with other people. Marital sex is not only self-giving, but as a corollary, it's receptive. It accepts something that is offered by another as a form of that person's self-giving. Marital sex is a form of communication. It's something of oneself is offered to another who receives that into his or her own self. Now, consumption of pornography mirrors this too. It mirrors a kind of activity that's characteristic of sex, and it also mirrors a kind of receptivity. Once obtained, pornography works on its recipient by way of arousal. The consumer is passive in its presence. Now, its producers maybe could tell them, or as we say in the South, could tell themselves a story about how what they do is for the benefit of the consumer, and thus is a form of self-giving, that they're giving something to the consumer. They're making their life better in some way. But there is no personal communication of self from the producers of pornography to its recipients, and thus nothing of personal nature to be received. The communication of pornography is paradigmatically impersonal. And so while there is a kind of sexual passivity, it's a distorted mirror only of the personal receptivity that is characteristic of marital sexuality. Point 5, pornography is boring. What does it mean to be boring? I wish I had a philosophy of the boring. I think that would be kind of cool. I don't, but here are a couple of thoughts, right? Because that's what I set out to do, have some thoughts. Here's a characteristic of what's boring. The condition of being bored is a condition of being unable to stand in the present moment in a way that holds the past and future together in the present. When we're fully engaged in an activity, it is inevitably temporal, but in an unusual way. For example, the past is present to us in the meaningfulness of what we're doing now, and it can't be disengaged from that meaning. If you're reading a novel intelligently, what has already gone before is a part of what you're reading now and is crucial to its significance. But there's also, right now, an anticipation of the future that does not evacuate the present of its meaning. That is, if all you want out of something is yet to come, right? If all you want out of what you're doing right now is something in the future, then the present means something to you only for where it brings you in the future. But our most meaningful activities manage to anticipate the future without this evacuation of present meaning. In fact, it's often the opposite. Recognition of the way that the future will be related to what we're doing now can give increased significance to our present activities. And the boring is not like this. There's no holding of the three times together. There's only the movement from past to present to future. So think about the difference between a long car ride in which the miles just come and go, and a vacation trip in which where we've been and where we're going both contribute to the significance of where we are now. The former is boring, right, in a way that the latter is not. Now, history, it was famously said, is one damn thing after another. I think that could be more accurately said about pornography. What has already been viewed is done. It's history. What is present is nothing but passing into the future. No moment of its use captures its past or anticipates its future, and so it's boring. And its use realizes neither the good of play, nor of work, nor of knowledge, nor of aesthetic experience, goods whose realization might be superficially like the use of pornography, but whose realization requires past and future to be caught up in the present. And as boring, pornography use is, I actually think, like at least some other computer use, pornography use distorts our sense and use of time. Having no natural end, no natural fulfillment to give narrative sense to its use, pornography consumption can go on, a meaningless parade of images. The opportunity cost to using time in this way are surely enormous, and the failure to appreciate a different relationship to time, namely the one that I described just before, is also, I'll discuss below, significant. 6, pornography is reductive of the body. I am this living organism that you see before you. And that thesis is central to the defense of unborn human beings. For that thesis underwrites the claim that the earliest moments of organic existence, the earliest moments of organic existence as a human being are also personal moments of existence. It's also central to the defense of marriage as an institution that's uniquely realized in the union of two persons in their bodily union, a union that would be illusory were we not organisms, but only, say, minds or souls. In sex, in real sex, the bodily nature of oneself and one's spouse can hardly be forgotten. But pornography weirdly distorts bodily existence to the point of elimination. The other person initially is just a body and is reduced to no more than a set of desirable organs. But then that body is itself flattened out into images on a page or on a computer screen. Connection to the other person's organic existence is radically mediated by the medium in question. And connection to everything personal about this flattened body is also eliminated. Even a prostitute is someone with whom one must have personal contact, but the object of pornography is out of touch. And one's relationship to one's own body is likewise distorted, especially in the paradigmatic masturbatory case of pornographic consumption. As noted earlier, one is passive in relationship to porn's content. The exploratory forms of engagement that characterize our connection to the real world are absent, and we render ourselves merely eyes for taking in images. The receipt of those images, if it works, renders us passive subjects of sexual desire. And then we manually, so to say, address our body to force it to give up its pleasures in a momentary expense of spirit and a waste of shame. As others have shown, treatment of one's body in this way affects a dualistic separation between one's conscious self and the body that one is instrumentalizing in order to please the self. And it's thus a violation of the good of integrity. 7, pornography distances us from the rest of the social world. And I'm going to be very quick here. A person who uses pornography is committed in principle to the possibility of treating some other human beings as objects for arousal and satisfaction of desire, namely the human beings who are the subject of the pornography. But it's difficult to see how this doesn't change one's relationship to all others who are capable of arousing that same desire. I'm a little skeptical of the most extreme theses of thinkers such as Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McKinnon, right, to the effect that pornography makes rapists of men, maybe a slight exaggeration of their view, but I don't doubt at all that they're on to something, and it seems to me that the abundance of evidence that was presented to us earlier should convince us that indeed they are. 8, pornography corrupts family relationships. The problems introduced into marriage by pornography use by one spouse, I think, are beginning to be better appreciated. Here's an example of one, maybe that doesn't get as much attention as it should. A pornography-consuming spouse, like an adulterous spouse, often, and probably has to, lie about what he or she is doing. Pornography use thus erodes mutual trust in marriage. And this is to be expected, of course. A spouse willing to be aroused by somebody outside the marriage is an insufficiently committed spouse. But if marriages are harmed by pornography use, then so also are the children of those marriages harmed as well, beginning with their deprivation of parents who fully realize the good of marriage. Such children lack models of sound marital love and possess poor models for their own subsequent choices. So pornography use exerts a top-down bad influence on family life when it begins with parental choices. But pretty clearly, it can exercise a malign influence from the bottom up as well. The use of pornography among minors in a household must also be disruptive of family relationships, requiring, for example, disobedience, lies and dishonesty of children to parents, and often an ongoing failure on the parents' part to adequately exercise parental responsibility or oversight, right? Often when parents would rather look the other way than address a real problem in their house. Pornography thus harms families wherever it begins in the home. And again, each of these points could be, I think, elaborated at much greater length, and I'm being quite quick now for the sake of getting where I want to get to. 9.9. Pornography distances us from an adequate understanding of God. Among the most essential aids that God has given us to understand who He is and how He is related to us are images that are sexual, marital, and familial. God is three persons whose distinctness is intact, while at the same time those three persons are one God, somewhat as spouses are two persons, yet one flesh. The relationship of the persons described in the Creed is one of begetting, and is understood by theologians as one of mutual loving and receiving of love. God's love is generative and creative. Understanding marital love, its fecundity, and the way in which male and female are created in God's image is thus essential to understanding, in our limited way, who God is. God's relationship to His chosen people, like Christ's relationship to His church, is spousal and characterized by spousal fidelity. We can have insight into that relationship by understanding the nature and requirements of marital commitment. God's relationship to us is also paternal. We are His children and should show towards Him something like the piety that we owe to our own parents on earth. That cannot be done if we do not rightly understand parent-to-child or child-to-parent relationships. The second person of the Trinity became man, incarnate, a being of living flesh and blood, who died and rose again in His bodily nature to take kingship of the heavenly kingdom, in which we hope to live as resurrected bodily beings. That can make no sense to people who think of their bodily lives in merely instrumental terms and who are dualists at heart. Christian history is not just one damned thing after another. It avoids, literally, history being that. It's all captured in the now of Christ's life, and particularly in His redeeming sacrifice on the cross and resurrection from the dead. Christ's life, death, and resurrection was anticipated by the past of the Jewish people and is anticipatory of the eschaton, when He will hand all things over to His Father. That now that was Christ's life, shaped by past and oriented to future, is shared in by Christians in the Eucharist, which perpetuates that sacrifice through time. But how can these truths be fully appreciated by those whose sense of time is distorted and dulled by what is boring? And pornography is boring. St. Paul tells us that the body was not made for immorality. Why is this so important? One reason, though not the only reason, is because going down the road that Paul warns us of is a route to losing our grasp on all the ways that God and His relationship to us can be understood. And pornography is a big part of that road. Point 10, final point, very brief. Universities are corrupted by pornography. A university is a home for free inquiry into the truth, but pornography diminishes our freedom and erodes our grasp of truths about sex, marriage, family, self, society, reality, time, and God. If so, the widespread presence and use of pornography on a university campus, and especially in a Catholic university, should be a source of very great concern. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Dan Philpott, for that introduction. And I want to say thank you before I proceed to all of those who organized and put the conference together. Members of SCOP, led by the able Tiernan Kane, President, our own Tim Bradley, who was the lead organizer as far as I can tell. Tim is sitting over here and he's wearing the green jacket. It makes you think he won the Masters golf tournament. He hasn't. It's been a remarkable day for me. There are other Bradley family members present, including nearly 19-year-old Notre Dame freshman Anna Bradley, who I encountered shortly after arriving this morning. We were standing around outside. I think I was holding a cup of coffee and talking with a couple of people, and there approached Anna, or there appeared Anna, saying, "Well, Dad, is there anything I can do for you, anything you need?" And I confess to have been a bit surprised that Anna said this to me. And one of the people that was standing there said, "Well, isn't that really nice that your daughter talks to her father that way?" And Anna interjected, no, Tiernan and Tim told me I have to do anything the speakers asked me to do. So thanks, Anna, you tried. Now I'm going to decline to follow the example of my longtime friend and esteemed colleague, Chris Tollefsen. I don't intend to do a David Letterman type of rendition of my remarks. I was thinking of whether I should have 10 thoughts and just count down from 10 to 1, but I don't. I don't know how many thoughts I have, but I do have something to say. And it begins this way. A funny thing happened to pornography on the way to its promised land. Pornography's perfect host culture would be one where the people are innocent of sexual sin. Now, people in pornography's promised land would do and watch other people do all sorts of things that would make a sailor blush. But people in the promised land would not consider these things to be sexual sins. For them, they don't recognize the concept of sexual sin. For them, autonomy and sexual self-determination are everything. Consent would be the principle of sexual morality. In the promised land, when it comes to sex, there are really just two kinds of people, the willing and the unwilling. Now, forcing somebody to have sex would indeed be wrong in the promised land as a violation of somebody else's autonomy. See, in the promised land of pornography, there'd be no such thing as a victimless sexual immorality, and watching porn in one's man cave on the computer screen would raise no serious moral question. Now, so far described, pornography's happy place, its emerald city, if you will, still has at least one problem, the problem of the commons. For in the emerald city, decent folks, the unwilling, have rights, including the right not to be bombarded with pornographic images on the subway, on the way to school, or at the city park. And of course, children, insofar as they are taken to be incapable of sexual self-determination, need to be protected from pornography. So in the Emerald City, the highway billboards, broadcast TV, mass circulation magazines, Main Street signage, all of these things are regulated by the police in the interest of decency. Public authorities try to maintain a compromise in public spaces, in the commons, between reticence and display, between restraint and sexual self-expression. And mind you, in the promised land, so far described, in the old days, people who wanted to enjoy porn had to traverse the commons to get it and then enjoy it. But what if pornography could bypass the commons? What if pornography could be delivered, paid for, enjoyed without footfalls, without dropping coins, without brown paper wrappers, without sitting in the balcony on a sunny day with other men wearing raincoats? What if instead of having to brave the commons, the dancing, prancing harem of your imagination could be made to appear on your TV screen with one click? Well, it's easy to see that although we probably don't yet live in the Emerald City, we probably live in a suburb of it. And one way to grasp this is to think or compare, if you can, pictures of Times Square. Let's say one from 25 or perhaps 30 years ago when I was a prosecutor in Manhattan, with a picture of Times Square last night. 25 or 30 years ago, you'd see a place teeming with massage parlors, street walkers, hustlers, XXX movies, peep shows, live sex shows. Tonight, Times Square looks a lot like, well, Disneyland, yet we live in a pornotopia. Well, you might ask, what's the funny thing about all this? Well, the answer is nothing at all. The promised land is a catastrophe for human flourishing. It's toxic to human well-being. But here's the funny thing. Porn's not going to make it to the Emerald City. It may be standing on the mountaintop peering into the promised land, but like Moses, it's not going to get there. The tidal wave of porn has crested, and the water has begun to recede from shore. Because the startling fact, the amazing fact, is that after about 45 years of being indoctrinated with the dogma that porn is harmless entertainment, not everybody's idea of fun, but perfectly fine for those who like it, and those who don't like it should simply stay away from it. But after about 45 years of being told porn is harmless, after about 20 years or so of wall-to-wall porn from the internet, and at least 10 years after our culture decided to make sexual self-determination, sexual autonomy, sexual identity the key aspect of one's own search for meaning in life, the startling fact is that 2/3 of Americans polled several months ago held that watching pornography is morally unacceptable. Fewer than 3 in 10 thought it was morally okay to watch pornography, and about 6% didn't know what they thought. And I'm willing to bet any of you my entire collection of Honeymooners TV episodes, you know, the Gleason sitcom, Ralph Cramden, which I value greatly, but I will bet my Honeymooners collection that that number, 2/3, would rise perhaps dramatically if the people who were polled were here this morning and heard more about what's wrong and harmful with pornography. Indeed, I think that number would probably rise dramatically if people were here this morning just for Donna Hughes's talk, insofar as Donna Hughes would convey a bit vividly what porn today is actually like. But there's more good news. Only 39% of Americans would actually oppose legal restrictions on pornography. Put that differently, about 60% of the people in our society would support legal restrictions on pornography. Now, this is incredibly good news because it it shows that the American people understand that porn is not only wrong, it is morally unacceptable, but it's harmful, that constitutes a social problem, that it is a threat to our common life, to our common good, and that it's time to exercise some social responsibility and to do something as a society about porn, including to take legal steps. Well, that's what I mean when I say that we're not going to see porn enter the Emerald City. Now, anecdotal evidence, and by that I simply mean journalists' accounts, literary renditions, personal memoirs from people who consume porn, people who make porn, but all of the other evidence of a non-scientific nature confirms this basic picture. Porn is not only distasteful to people, they recognize that it's wrong, and they're mad as hell and not going to take it anymore, that they're prepared as a society to do something about it. But what? And how? What would a social response to pornography, to dealing with it effectively and forcefully, actually look like? And here I think is the question I'm going to take up for the balance of my remarks. And I think it's the question of my field of inquiry, my area of concern, which is law and social policy. People are teed up to do something about pornography. The sense of the harms of pornography is crystallized in people. They recognize that it's a social problem, but what actually to do? Well, here I think the difficulty is compounded by what I take to be 3 constraints, side constraints, but almost non-negotiable practical problems or impediments to any effective anti-porn social policy. And here they are. And I attribute these views to a large number of Americans, to the American psyche, to American political culture and American law. First, don't censor the internet. Now, the internet works fine. It's a great social amenity precisely because it's free. So great numbers of Americans, including many who are prepared to do something about porn, I think would oppose censoring the internet. I think any effective and broadly acceptable social policy, including legal action against porn, would have to respect the deep libertarian streak in the American people. By that I mean simply the commitment of the American people, their political culture and their laws, to respecting privacy and liberty when it comes to people choosing, especially within their own homes, what to read, what to look at, what to enjoy. The third constraint I would call the deep anti-paternalism or deep anti-paternalistic streak in American political culture and law. And by that I mean simply the following, and it may well be what you think. And again, it's not a mysterious idea, but here's what I mean by it. The American people have long taken the view that at least with regard to the criminal law, and with regard to law more generally, people should not be punished nor sanctioned, strictly speaking, for their own good. But that would be paternalistic in a negative way. Anti-paternalism requires, you might say, the law to operate for social goods and to protect the common good. To put this point very plainly, and not for a minute suggesting disagreement with Professor Tollefsen's account of what's wrong with porn, I'm talking here about an element of a broadly acceptable social and legal policy to contain porn. I think that it won't be well-founded if at the heart or near the center or even a large part of the objective is expressed as limiting masturbation or curbing lustful thoughts. And that's where the anti-paternalism, the American psyche, hits the road. It's just not going to work if the campaign depends upon enlisting large numbers of people in a legal and social effort designed to stymie, reduce the number of lustful thoughts, and to combat masturbation. So I think we're looking for the sweet spot, the perfect storm. Where can an effective strategy against porn sort of crystallize, galvanize, focus, and express this deep awareness of the problems of porn, this 2/3 or more of the American people? No, porn's wrong and something has to be done. Well, where is that sweet spot where we can express and articulate that while respecting these side constraints? Well, I have an answer, and here it is. I think we should use the law in some essential but secondary ways to create and maintain a social and cultural stigma on pornography. A stigma not just as offensive to some people, but a stigma on pornography as wrong, as corrupting, as harmful, as immature, as shameful, as for losers. It's at least, according to this stigma, and it doesn't have to be univocal, it can be understood across that range of descriptive words. It's at least sad and pathetic for people to watch porn, and usually it's worse than that. Now this dynamic, I just call it phenomenologically, this picture of using the law in strategically important but secondary ways to sustain a stigma with a view to discouraging, reducing an activity, well, that's familiar. That's not my insight. We do it all the time in our society, right? What do we do with smoking, sexist and racist speech, with adultery, with cruelty to animals, perhaps soon obesity and consuming fatty foods, maybe already with corporal punishment. Perhaps bullying will be the next act that is stigmatized with strategic support from the law. Years ago, but within my lifetime, illegitimacy, divorce, surely abortion, getting a tattoo were stigmatized in this way. Now, maybe we should also generate, if we could and had the excess energy and time, stigmas now on binge drinking, hooking up, and watching the Kardashians. But I'll leave that aside. But again, using the law strategically, but in a secondary way, to create and maintain a stigma on porn as unacceptable, not to be done, shameful, disgusting, if you will, harmful. Now, I'm not asking any of you to agree with all of my examples, whether it's adultery, abortion, sexist, racist speech, bullying, homophobic speech, smoking, cruelty to animals. I'm not asking anybody to agree with all of those as good ideas for stigmatization campaigns. I'm just using them as examples of what I mean by stigmatization campaigns. And we can and should try to do the same thing with pornography. Because I think the time is right. I think that in general terms, and not with specific regard to pornography, even libertarians, liberals, if you will, are ready to sign on to what could be called non-coercive moral regulation in our society. I'll give you an example of this viewpoint. Richard Reeves wrote recently in the New York Times, he's a journalist and author, historian, not conservative. I have no idea what he thinks of pornography. But he wrote in the New York Times, shame is not a four-letter word. It is an essential ingredient of a healthy society, particularly a liberal one. It acts as a social nudge, encouraging good behavior while guarding individual freedom. So one side constraint I mentioned earlier, respecting liberty or respecting the libertarian streak in the American psyche and American political culture. We'll check that one off. As I said, I don't think that the grounds, purposes, justifications for the campaign should ever feature centrally or mainly stymieing lustful thoughts and punishing or at least sanctioning masturbation. I think that the goals include, well, everything that's been talked about so far today, but let me try to give expression to at least much of what's been said today. I think the goals of the stigmatization campaign would include what I would call a quasi-paternalistic care for each one, for each person, young and old, potential consumer of porn. For that person's or those persons, healthy psychosexual development so that those persons either grow into or, if grown, remain the kinds of persons who are capable of entering into marriages, healthy sexual relationships, and have a healthy sort of psychosexual personality profile. So that's quasi-paternalistic. It's not a matter of punishing someone for doing an immoral thing. It's helping a person to build a proper or virtuous character. But as I said earlier, much earlier, the commons may be stripped of the open or brazen display of porn, but I think we can see that even though the commons may be bare and even sterilized, our common life and the common good of our society has gone in the toilet. So perhaps the main objectives of the stigmatization campaign would be and should be stated as protecting valuable forms of social and common life, especially including monogamy. Okay, we've been cheating marriage for decades now. Almost everyone, liberal, conservative, young, old, academic, on the street, everybody knows that the breakdown of marriage and in turn the family is responsible for a host of social ills. I think everybody understands that, but it's not so clear what people are prepared to do to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. But at a minimum, we can see, based on this morning, that porn is especially stressful, if not toxic, for married life. Monogamy is an institution that isn't carried on or practiced by individuals or small groups. If you're going to have monogamy in a society, you need a society and a culture and a law to support it. And I mean support it as a sexual relationship. So just for example, to try to help people, yes, especially men, remain attracted physically and sexually to the man, to his wife, in season and out of season, as they both grow old, and where neither looks like the young buck or the young lass of old. So just to keep up and help people keep up a sexual attraction to each other as they grow old by limiting the availability, but more exactly by stigmatizing porn as unworthy, as harmful to relationships. But even more generally, stigmatizing porn will help promote, protect mutuality, reciprocity, and equality in all sexual relationships. And beyond that, let's face it, free porn, porn's promised land, the Emerald City of porn, takes the gender gap between men and women in sexual desire, in patterns of sexual arousal, in various other aspects of sexuality. It takes the existing gender gap and widens it into a chasm. To put it differently, yes, men are from Mars and women are from Venus, and in a pornotopia like ours, the men get more and more like men, and the women tend to remain, well, pretty much as women. And this opens up a chasm between men and women to the detriment of marriage and the family. So the goals here would be common, valuable forms of life: respect, liberty, and respect the anti-paternalist principle. And I think this is the way to go. Now, one defense, and I think I will compress what I might otherwise say in the interest of time. One objection to what I'm proposing, because notice the stigma is porn's bad, porn's depraved, porn is harmful, don't do porn, porn corrupts you, it's for losers, it's shameful. The stigma is about porn. But anybody can see that porn has different effects upon different viewers, and to say that porn or viewing porn is wrong covers over the differences. Well, what kind of porn? And how often would you be looking at it? And how long would you look at it each time you decide to look at it? And anyone can see that viewing porn can and does have different effects upon different people, but even upon the same person at different points in his or her life. So what I'm saying is, well, I recognize that viewing porn is, in these respects and others, a variegated phenomenon. But I'm saying that we should sustain a social judgment that porn's just plain bad and wrong. But I recognize the truth in the variegated nature of porn viewing. Well, to that I say the following. Only a fraction of the people who smoke cigarettes ever get lung cancer. Now, most people can wash down Twinkies with big gulps of pop and stay fit. And did you know that in 2010, only 0.009% of incidents where someone drove alcohol impaired resulted in an alcohol-related or fatal car accident? Put that differently, about 1 in 10,000 incidents of driving while impaired led to a traffic death. But the Surgeon General says smoking's dangerous. It's not good for you. Don't do it. The First Lady, as well as your mom, says stop eating junk or you'll get fat. And everybody realizes that drunk driving is dangerous to life and limb, so you don't do it. And you get in trouble with the law if you do it, whether or not you kill somebody. Well, like those examples, porn, too, may not be as destructive to some as to others. And for argument's sake, and I stress, for argument's sake, I might grant that porn can have modest and perhaps inconspicuous bad effects upon some people some of the time. Now, notice I say for argument's sake. But so what? Just like these other examples indicate, we're talking about sustaining a socially responsible collective judgment to the effect, don't get involved with porn. For porn is addictive to some people, compulsive for many more, and has destructive effects probably upon most who use it. And people who begin using it can never know for sure which group or cohort they're in. So everybody is served by stigmatizing porn, saying as a society, stay away from pornography. Because you don't know going in if you're one of the lucky third, lucky two-thirds, or whatever the breakdown or size of the cohorts happens to be. But even apart from that, the burden of my remarks really is to instill in the American people a sense of social responsibility for porn. For too long, it's been a matter of pure consumerism. Look, if you don't want a brown refrigerator, then don't buy a brown refrigerator. But how could you possibly say other people shouldn't be allowed to buy a brown refrigerator? You think it's aesthetically a joke, doesn't belong in any kind of decent kitchen, but that's your taste. That's your personal judgment. That's the way we've thought of porn. We've disaggregated society. So let's just 300 million individuals, each acting as a consumer, satisfying his or her preferences. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a socially responsible ethic. So even someone who believes himself or herself to be immune to the allures and dangers of porn should support a campaign to stigmatize it, because that will help other people, because that will support in the society good, common forms of life. Or more exactly, by joining the campaign to stigmatize porn, even someone who considers themselves immune to its dangers will nonetheless be doing the socially responsible thing. Lastly, use law strategically but in a secondary way to generate and sustain a stigma upon porn, as in smoking, drunk driving, etc. Well, let me give you three examples of how that might look on the ground, just to make it operational and maybe explain a little bit more what I have in mind by using some examples, or I should say, three elements of such a program. And I'll focus especially on law. One, there should be some criminal prosecutions. Again, I say law is secondary, and the police are not the main players in this. If you can imagine the cultural and social police and personify them in your imagination, they'd be the main enforcers. Public opinion, cultural judgment, and stigma. The police, the men in uniforms, badges, carrying guns, would be secondary players, but there is a role for them. Now, I'm talking now about adult pornography, not about child pornography. But as far as we can tell, in the last 6 years, that is since Obama became president, we've had zero new federal prosecutions, none whatsoever of adult pornography or adult pornographers, none whatsoever. The numbers on state and local levels are probably not much better. They're probably not zero, but they're not very good. I think it's important that there be some prosecutions of pornographers. Now, I think these should be larger packagers, distributors, producers, not consumers, frankly, but some of the larger producers. Perhaps we should start with those whose pornography is most distant from healthy sexual relationships. In Britain, they've, in the last few years, have passed a law about extreme porn involving bestiality, necrophilia, and other, really offbeat and perverse activities. Well, perhaps, but we should start somewhere. And I think we should think, given what else has been said today and what I'm saying, of pornographers as predators, as exploiting others' weaknesses, as carelessly or in reckless disregard for other person's well-being, and for the well-being and integrity of their marriages, just spinning off indiscriminately threats to those marriages and to those persons' sexual and psychological health. The pornographers are predators. So in my imagery of stigma, you might say that we should prosecute some of these pornographers, and the way to think about what we're doing is that we're prosecuting people who are a cross between pimps and tobacco companies. But no doubt, there isn't any number of possible prosecutions, that is, any practically possible number, that could supply by itself or by themselves the stigma about which I'm speaking. And if we had the stigma, we wouldn't need very many prosecutions. So I think there should be some prosecutions, but to contribute to the generation of the stigma. Two, I think we should probably refashion first the way we describe some of the existing policies about using computers at work. Now, in many federal government departments, including the Department of Defense, it is stipulated in the manual of rules that one is not to use pornography on one's work computer. Now, in the rules it's described, and other departments are like this, but it's described as inappropriate personal use. I think the rule is fine, and it is enforced, but it should be described more accurately. Using pornography is bad, it's wrong, it's harmful, and it's being an accomplice to criminal and antisocial activity. So take the policies and describe them more truthfully, but then extend them. Why not think in terms of adding as a rider to any contract between, let's say, the federal government and the University of Notre Dame? Any federal contractor, that among the provisions of the contract as an exercise of the spending power of the federal government, that any recipient institution, Notre Dame, someplace else, will have to have policies in place forbidding the use of pornography or consumption of pornography on any computer if you're a federal contractor, and you have to have policies whereby people know how to report violations of this, and you have to have a scheme for dealing with employees who violate the policy. Now, I don't recommend everything that's in place with regard to Title IX and sexual harassment, but I would say that there are elements of that way of enforcing notions of gender equality, namely Title IX and sexual harassment policies, which could be imported here. So connect federal or state funds to an anti-porn use policy. Last, I think the only way to enforce existing legal rights and rights acquired through laws to be passed and to enforce them effectively with a sting against pornographers is to encourage what we would call in law private rights of action. Now, I think it was Donna Hughes mentioned earlier today that there's been some question about actresses, she didn't say it was a question, actresses who were forced into performing sexual acts on movie sets. Now, I think there's room there for those actresses to be empowered to enforce laws against sexual slavery, rape, sexual abuse against producers. So those individual persons would have a civil right of action. Right now, there's a developing mini-industry that Mary Leary mentioned about revenge porn. And this has nothing to do with porn actresses, but rather regular people whose personal or intimate videos are marketed by the jilted boyfriend and the vengeful boyfriend. There already are laws in place to make it possible for victims of revenge porn to exact their revenge. That's just another example of what I mean when I say that the points of enforcement will have to be multiple and indeed need to proliferate if the enforcement regimen is going to be effective. Because if we wait for the central government, for the public authorities to do all of the enforcing, we'll be waiting a very long time.
We have about 15 minutes for questions, so please, I think we have microphones set up. You can approach the microphone, and please do us the favor of identifying yourself before you ask your question.
Hi, my name is Greg Duffy. I'm a senior economics major, and so I have a question for Dr. Bradley. I thought those examples that you gave about stigmatizing cigarettes and homophobic slurs and stuff like that was a really good thought exercise to compare how we should then approach pornography. One thing that I see like two differences. I'm wondering how you might address them between pornography use and those things. One, that sexuality is a more entrenched issue in human nature, right? So it's more inherent to who I am than cigarette usage or racist speech because it's a part of who I am. And also the second thing being that there's a spectrum present of, from, let's say, scantily clad women on billboards all the way toward pornography. So we see this kind of dispersing of levels, I guess, of pornography. So whereas I don't see that as much in those other issues. So how would you strategically approach the law in keeping those things in mind?
I mean, good questions. I wouldn't dispute or enter into a dispute about what elements are hardwired and what elements are culturally acquired or the product of early life experiences when it comes to our sexuality. But I think what I'm proposing can swing free of arguments about those points and wherever the truth may happen to fall, because I'm talking about viewing pornography, which isn't itself, as a proposal that we should stigmatize pornography, going to fall unevenly or differently upon various types of sexual activity. So fetishistic porn, gay porn, if that's what it's called, straight porn, all sorts of porn should be equally stigmatized. And I don't think I'm proposing, and based upon what Chris Tollefsen said and others have said this morning, I'm proposing it's not good for anybody. It's really not, whatever one's sexuality. Now, that view of mine doesn't so much presuppose, but calls for argument in favor of the conclusion that there are valuable forms of social life, monogamy, relationships of equality and reciprocity, sexual relationships of that sort, gender equality, if you will, within these relationships, so the chasm between men and women, which has opened up, is a bad thing. Now, these are valuable things which everyone in society, no matter what their particular individual proclivities, you might say, should be required to support because they're good for people. Now, as to the other examples, sexual and racist speech and pornography and smoking, I recognize that there's been a dramatic trickle-down effect of the proliferation of awful that is beyond hardcore porn on the internet. So that today, what we consider to be softcore used to be hardcore. What's on broadcast TV at 10 p.m. used to be verboten across the board. Now, I would leave that aside and deal with pornography. Let people, in a sense, judge precisely what they think counts as pornography themselves. Because, one, everything I propose about stigmatizing pornography, and I think almost everything that other people have said today about what's harmful concerning pornography, would be true of the vast bulk of the stuff that you can get on the internet. That is to say, we live in a world in which the status of material as truly obscene and pornographic is little in doubt for a vast bulk of it. And if we just think in terms of combating that with a stigma, we'll be doing something pretty good. And second, precision of definition. Well, what exactly is pornography? Is this magazine pornographic? Is the swimsuit edition or issue of Sports Illustrated pornographic or Victoria's Secret? Well, I don't really know. But I don't think that really makes a whole lot of difference because what we're talking about is not proving beyond a reasonable doubt the pornographic nature of a book or magazine so we can get a criminal conviction. If we're talking about stigmatizing activity, I do think that's compatible with a certain elasticity and fuzziness at the edges of the matter that's being defined. Now, cigarettes are cigarettes, but with racist and sexist speech, I think that it's properly stigmatized. Now, whether saying this word or that word in this context to those people counts as an instance which should be stigmatized, or rather it's in the context of a joke and get over it, or not, I mean, those are legitimate questions, but I think that's true about racist, sexist speech and some other of the activities that we do, in fact, stigmatize. So the fact that the definitions would leave a little bit of unsatisfaction at the edges is not a large difficulty.
Let me jump in and ask a question. I want to ask a question of Chris Tollefsen. And you revolved your talk around the good of marriage and is saying that it is in light of the good of marriage, seeing that as a basic good, a constitutive good of human flourishing, that we can understand what's wrong with porn. And my question is in order to understand what's intrinsically wrong with porn, can that only be understood in terms of the good of marriage? Now, obviously, there are forms of exploitation and so forth, and so that probably wouldn't require that. But to understand it as an intrinsic wrong, to view pornography, in other words, if we didn't have the good of marriage, would we then be living in the emerald city of self-defining autonomy, the way that Jerry described? Sure. Yeah.
Thanks. I think it's not. I think it's pretty close to the essence of what's wrong with pornography use and production. But I think there's something else that is so proximate to it and at work in almost every instance of it that I only really just gestured at one point in the paper, and that's the disintegrating quality to one's relationship to pornography, right? Insofar as one is using it in order to stimulate oneself. That, I think, is treating your body as a tool, right? It's a parallel to the tool-mindedness that's involved in treating the objects of the pornography also as tools for you. And both of those are, I think, independent wrongs that are very, very close to the heart of pornography. It's just that insofar as, and I think one could be on board with thinking of both of those as important wrongs, even if one didn't start in the place that I started with the good of marriage. I do think that if you start there, that gets the wrongness of marriage or the wrongness of pornography use very, very close in to even very mild cases of pornography. You have reason to be suspicious, even of the Sports Illustrated, even if you start that closely in. But I think you can do an awful lot of work with those other two accounts of why it's wrong as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
My name's Cindy Black, and I work for the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend. Mary Ann got us pretty fired up with getting, we need to start speaking out against this and not be silent. And we have an opportunity to stigmatize 50 Shades of Stupid coming up here very soon. Any practical suggestions from anyone on how we might start that stigmatization right now by pointing out the stupidity or the harmfulness of even something that becomes so socially acceptable as 50 Shades of Grey?
Using the example of the swimsuit issue, which is coming out, well, I just noticed we got, the 50 Shades of Grey movie. I rejoice to say I don't know too much about the movie. I know enough about it to know I'm not going to go see it. But as to what's an effective way or a set of effective strategies for conveying not just revulsion, which I think is worth conveying, I suppose, but it tends to play into the script that the other side, if you will, has written for us. I mean, everybody recognizes that there are many people who happen not to like dirty movies or SBMDB or whatever this stuff is about. So I think it's one thing I would say is to be emboldened, perhaps of what you've heard today, to express opposition, judge it to be immoral, not just I find it personally revolting and disgusting and my mom never told me about this kind of stuff, and to be emboldened also by knowing that you're far, far from alone. And I would introduce, if you're writing a letter to the editor or giving a short talk or preparing talking points for the bishop, I think it may help to abstract a little bit from the particular example, because it sounds a bit improbable if you're heard to say, well, this movie is ruining the family. Now, thankfully, I think, no one movie can ruin the family. So I think it is helpful to talk about its mainstreaming, and its presentation as perfectly unobjectionable to a wide and indiscriminate audience. Now, I take it the movie would be R, so the kids can't attend it. But again, the picture that you're sort of holding in view is not just it's an awful movie, it's the attitudes of people around it who promote it, exhibit it, review it, go see it, recommend it to their friends. They're all accomplices. They're all enablers. So it's immoral, it's socially corrosive, and not everybody, but so many people are wittingly or unwittingly accomplices to the destruction. And lastly, I do think, and I wish I could think of a more effective way to express this than to simply say, as I said earlier, to instill a sense of social responsibility, because I think that's the big impediment in the middle of the road. People, even decent people, think of it as really, well, it is like consumerism, and mostly people kind of have to decide for themselves what to do and watch. They're not yet seeing clearly that this is affecting everybody in society, and everybody has a responsibility for the common life in the society.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions, one for Dr. Bradley first. I believe you mentioned something about 3 constraints, and I got the internet censorship and the anti-paternalistic stuff, and I must have been...
Respecting the libertarian streak in the American people,
okay.
There's a deep sense in which you should decide for yourself what to watch and what to read in your house.
Okay. And then secondly, what would be so for you, what would be some secondary constraints that you think could be addressed? And then I appreciate the stigma, the social stigma. It's not enough just to stigmatize something. You need to replace it with something positive. So, Chris, if I could maybe ask you to, what would be a better way to go about for whether it be the Catholic Church or for other parts of the society to really step into that place and say, here's a better image, a better picture of why we don't view pornography, why we stigmatize it, because this is a healthier way of thinking about it. What your thoughts are on that?
I'm not sure, Chris.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. And I'll just focus on one part of what I was talking about in relationship to it. I think pornography use, and I mentioned this very quickly in passing as well as a lot of other internet use, is boring and pointless in the ways that I was describing. Right? Now, people would not. I mean, there are reasons to gravitate towards the particular pointlessness of pornography because it does appeal to something that people desire very much. But other things being equal, people will have many better reasons to gravitate towards something that's not pointless and boring to the extent that opportunities for such activities are made possible. I think we make available to our children widespread computer use, just period, even apart from then the direction it goes with pornography, far too much. Right? And so one essential part of sort of social program, if you will, is learning how to raise children who are engaged in a wide variety of genuine activities that have that relationship to time that I was talking about. They're genuine forms of play, they're genuine forms of aesthetic experience, they're genuine forms of friendship, they're genuine forms of engagement with their families. They're eventually genuine forms of engagement with members of the opposite sex to whom they might be attracted sexually, but with whom they can find some other activity to engage themselves with. And I think that can really, I mean, a big part of that is moving children away from large-scale computer use. Mm-hmm. That's a big part of the approach that I take in my home, and I think it enables children to find ways of being interested in the world that are not mindless and corrupting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now that you mention it, Chris, thank you for giving me time to think. I mean, I think that's right on. It's dead on. That is to say, I think part of the problem is that porn is one way to use what people consider to be their entitled amount or their due amount of downtime. Now, I say this as somebody who will turn on the TV to watch the news and relax. I mean, and we fight with our kids about how much time they're on their computers, their laptops. But I do think it's easy to see that many people feel like just doodling around on their computers or mindlessly clicking on the TV remote, morosely consuming beer while playing video games. I mean, people feel entitled to an extraordinary amount of simple downtime where they're not required to exercise any real judgment about how they spend that time, nor are they really thinking in terms of doing anything productive or self-improving. And I think they think there's a lot of time in a given day or in a given week when this is their due. Now, if you think that way, it's a bit hard, not impossible, but a bit hard to explain to someone, well, you know what? It's fine if you played, well, this is showing my age, Dungeons and Dragons, right? That's yesterday's technology. But whatever the shooting games my kids play are now, so you could say, well, that's fine. You can do that for 8 hours on Saturday, but don't spend 15 minutes looking at the girls in the swimsuits. That's really bad. So I think that perhaps there's a wider reconsideration of leisure and what are called leisure time activities. It should be part of a discussion about pornography, because I think it's considered a species of downtime, relaxation, leisure, curiosity about the internet, and that's the genre in which you find pornography consumption.
I think we have time for one more question, so we can do
Okay,
that.
I have a question for each professor. Professor Bradley, my first question is what your response would be to the predictable feminist response to the idea of a stigma, that in practice a stigma would essentially hurt women more than anybody else and inhibit her ability to do what she wishes with her body, like, for example, in the modeling industry, or like with the famous porn stars today who are extremely wealthy women who seem to be having very endurable lives. And then for Professor Tollefsen, how you think that the idea of a stigma might, like where that line needs to be drawn to distinguish the healthy human sexuality idea versus a pornographic one. Like you mentioned, aesthetic, the beauty of the human body, sexuality, literary, sexual content, things like that.
Okay, I think that one part of a response, and there'd be two parts altogether, is that pornography now, for the foreseeable future, and perhaps inevitably is going to be highly gendered in terms of patterns of consumption, the sexual scripts that you find in pornography, the pattern of usage, so that women are always going to be the losers in a pornified culture by any measure of satisfaction, being well treated by men, access to and maintenance of satisfying sexual relationships with men. So women, not each woman, but women are going to be the losers in a pornified culture. The second part then I think would be, now I don't say that this will actually persuade the porn star or the aspiring swimsuit model, but this I think would be the truth of the matter, that even if for argument's sake, we granted that a pornified culture is somehow working for you. We're talking about solidarity, I guess of the sisterhood, but that for the benefit of everybody, one should support the stigmatization of porn. Now, again, I don't say that the budding swimsuit model is going to accept that, but that is the valid argument, that even if you're not personally debilitated, even by your involvement, either at the margins or even closer in to the middle of porn, it's still bad for people. It's dangerous to kids, and in a pornified culture, the kids will get it. Freedom can't even be guaranteed, much less, we're not even assured on either the production side, see what Donna Yu said, on the consumption side, it tends to be addictive. So there are 50 reasons why people should support the stigmatization of porn, and even people who see themselves as benefiting from a pornified culture should buy into that for the sake of other people.
Well, join me in thanking this two wonderful panelists for some great presentations and conversations.